The 17th Annual Cinema Touching Disability Film Festival presents Ctdff Online Filmmaker Q&A with Sean Leviashvili, LIMP, and Ashley Eakin, single.
Good afternoon, y'all. I am Dennis Borrell. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities, which is the organizer of Cinema Touching Disability. And yes, we do audio description. We have a number of people who have visual impairments who join us on these things. So my description is I am an Anglo male, pretty gray hair, gray beard, and in the background is the night sky of Austin, Texas. I'll tell you, it's so darn hot out there now in the middle of the afternoon in Austin that I thought maybe it might make you feel a little cooler if you saw some night vision. So this is our 17th year of doing Cinema Touching Disability, and William Greer, whom you'll meet later, has been our director for all 17 of those years. And until this year, we've typically done a theater event, and we do hope to do that theater event in October as well. We shall see whether that'll happen. But this year, we decided to try this online event. Now, the reason why we did that is our short film competition has gotten very large. We get entries from all over the world. And many of them, as William was talking about in the foreshadowing here, are so bad no one would ever want to see them. But we also get many good ones that we simply can't show during our theater event. So we tried to think, well, what can we do to, expose people to more excellent short films and recognize the filmmakers who produce this great work. So believe it or not, the secret is we are not doing the online film festival as a response to the coronavirus pandemic. We actually had planned to do this. Of course, now it's turning out to make us look really smart, which is a nice thing too. So there's 10 films. You can watch them anytime until September 15th on the online portal. And some of those films will make you smile. Some of them will provoke thoughts. We hope that all of those films will make you see the humanity of people with disabilities. Please, if you have any questions for our filmmakers, today we have Ashley Eakin and Sean Leviashvili. Okay.
Anything works. Anything works.
Anything works. Two excellent young filmmakers with us. So you can send in questions to the chat for the filmmakers who we'll be interviewing, or you can send them to filmfest@txdisabilities.org. So with that, I think we're going to screen our first film, Ashley Eakin's single, which, by the way, was always also a selection of the South by Southwest Film Festival this year. Two outstanding film festivals in Austin, Texas recognized Ashley's work. So Laura, let's take a look at single.
Following single.
Awesome, Ashley Eakin. Wow, that was quite, for a short film, you packed a lot of commentary in there. Very impressive. So I get to have the honor of asking Ashley a few questions here, and we'll go on to our second film. But yeah, you packed a lot of commentary in there, Ashley. So how did you come up with this story? True story?
No, it's not a true story, but it's inspired a lot of my life and a lot of experiences that have happened to me. I have not been set up on a date with someone who had a similar disability, but I have dated people who have, or one person who had a disability, and in the entire time, it was about 5 years ago, and the entire time, all I could think about was if people were looking at us like, oh, we're this disabled couple. And I was super insecure about having even like associating with the word disability at that time. And, I always wanted to make something that kind of addressed that notion of someone kind of having this internalized ableism, and then someone setting people up, because I've had friends that this has happened to, and, kind of went from there. It was made in the AFI directing workshop for women. So I made a short, my first short, or actually my second short, a couple years ago, and I knew I wanted to make something that was very dialogue heavy, that was like a really great conversation between two characters. My previous film was really kind of like a metaphor about disability, and it's a little artistic expression. It's not very like straightforward. And so I knew I wanted to make something that kind of had a commentary on, you know, my own journey of coming around to really embracing my disability and really understanding my own internalized ableism, and how I grew up with this, you know, this idea of like my mom telling me like, don't worry, you're not disabled, even though like I'm physically disabled. I have a bone disease. I've had 28 surgeries. Like, it's very visible. You know, it's funny how like growing up with that idea can actually bring this own complex and have this shame that you live with, you know, when people do identify you with disability. But I really feel like ever since, it's probably been about, I mean, even like maybe 2 years of fully really embracing this and being introduced to the whole disability community, I've never felt more free, more myself. Like, it's just so interesting once you actually, you know, just accept it and embrace it. And that's been a really, really interesting journey. So yeah, this is kind of friends. And, you know, I went to a camp with a bunch of women who had disabilities. And the huge topic that we talked about is dating, and how, you know, there's not a ton of stories about people with disabilities dating. And at the time I was doing a lot of online dating and app dating, and, you know, this whole complexity of, do you have to disclose your disability? And, you know, the unexpected, if someone did have a disability when you know, you showed up, and what would that be like if, you know, the character got set up? So it was kind of a combination of true stuff, but also kind of thinking outside the box for a fun story.
You know, the little exchange with the elevator woman who kind of gave you sort of the left-handed compliment. Oh, you have such a pretty face.
Yeah.
That's kind of not a compliment, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I feel like I want to write a book and that be the title of it, because that's something that people have said to me my whole life. And for so long, I think I was like, oh, that was really nice. And then you realize, when do people ever actually say that to anyone else? You know, you just would say you're pretty. You don't say you have a pretty face. You know, they're really looking at your body as like, oh, except for that part of you. You know, and I didn't really, it took me a while to really understand how offensive this was. And I love, you know, I still get it. And it's funny because I just want to send people a link to my short and be like, thanks, here's this movie you should watch, you know.
And you get a raw egg smashed on your head as a result. Well, I do have one other question. I've been thinking about this. Did you ever think of like having this like Hollywood rom-com ending where the two people on the date end up having a romantic kiss with the promise of future romance? Did that ever occur to you at all?
Yeah, you know, I mean, this is just the beginning of my career, and there's a lot of stories that I want to tell. And, you know, I have a love-hate relationship with rom-coms, because sometimes I'm like, this is so unrealistic, like this would never happen. But I do really want to show, you know, I want to show in a short film, a character arc. You can't have this huge revelation and coming to, you know, this epiphany in 15 minutes. So I really want to use those types of stories for like a feature or something, you know, a little that you can explore a little more. And I like kind of making an anti-rom-com, you know, they don't end up together. It's not what you think. And it's, you know, and it also shows the power of how much her, you know, she is not ready to deal with her disability. And so she's like, I don't want to have to deal with his disability and explain that to people. So I think it really shows, you know, they do have a lot in common. He's cute, you know, they have a chemistry. Like, it's really just about her not being okay with herself, essentially. So I really wanted to push that point forward.
Well, it comes across as very real. And so we're going to go on to our second film. And then after that, William will speak with Sean some. And then we'll have the two of our filmmakers available for questions and answers. So let's check out LIMP.
Following LIMP.
Thank you.
William, take it away.
Okay, I'm William Greer. That's the audio description. I'll audio describe myself. I'm white with brown hair. The background of me is the finish line of the Prickly Pear trail race. I started this festival in 2004, and this year we decided to show the online festival because there's so many films that deserve to get seen, but we just don't have time to show them all. So that's why we decided to pick a select few to highlight this year in our online festival. And LIMP is one of the movies that I picked because it shows a really interesting side of dating. So before I pass this over to Sean, I'll just start off with my first question. Sean, was this film based on a true experience? Is this based on how you went through dating or experiences you had in the past?
Yes. So my name is Sean Leviashvili. I even can't pronounce my last name. It's a tough one. And I am a white male with dark hair, and I'm sitting in front of a pink wall. And to answer your question, yes, this particular script that I wrote is actually based off of a date I went on in 2012, which is when I first started doing the whole online dating thing. I think we met on Grindr, which is a gay dating, if you want to call it dating. It's a gay app to meet and connect. And I was really excited about this date, and I went to a speakeasy in the Lower East Side, and I met this guy that was just a doll. He was so sweet. He grew up in a town close to me. He was very kind, very thoughtful, very interesting to talk to. And most of the night was spent sitting down. And I just had such a nice time with him. I felt like he really saw me. And at the end of the night, he asked, is your leg okay? Which is a very natural question to ask because I do have cerebral palsy. I have a version of it called spastic diplegia, and it mostly manifests in a limp that I have on my right leg and muscular tightness in general. So generally I've been okay answering this question, but on this particular night, on this particular date, I just had this feeling that I didn't want to discuss it. So I said, I just, I hurt myself earlier in the week. And one thing I noticed with this guy is the conversations going forward sort of dwindled, and he seemed to have lost a little bit of interest. And I couldn't understand why, because we had so much chemistry on the date and there was such a sort of tangible attraction. And the full wrap up of this script came around 2015 because I had reconnected with this guy. The character of Ethan, he has a different name in real life, but for just all intents and purposes, we called him Ethan. And when I met up with him, I actually asked him, what happened, because we had such a connection and then it seemed like you lost interest. And he said that he actually straight up told me he had just gotten out of a relationship with someone who lied a lot. And that while he understood me covering this up, at the time he just couldn't handle it, which it is what it is. I don't judge, but this is really the wrapped up source of inspiration for this short film. And, to just go one step further, yes, every single date, because I mostly like to meet guys through the apps because I don't love to go out that much. And every single time I do potentially meet up with someone, I do dread having this conversation. Yeah.
Now, why did your character why did you decide to have a meet up with the person interested in the political campaign and coming out that way and, speaking for equal rights that way? That was an interesting twist. What made you decide to go in that direction to wrap up the film?
You know, I thought about this idea of like a shift in consciousness for the main character, which is of course based on me. And there's been opportunities that throughout my life, you know, people have spoken to me about or approached, and I was always so nervous because I just did not want, you know, when you have a disability, and, you know, I was bullied as a kid a lot, I didn't want to draw more attention to myself. But I know that there's such a need to speak out about these stories. And that sort of thing came from like when people call us, when able-bodied people call someone with a disability a hero, I wondered like, what does that come from? Like, what do we deserve to be called a hero for? And then there's this whole concept of like, quote unquote, inspiration porn. So I wanted to explore this a little bit and have the main character sort of be more open to exploring this world where he would speak clearly and honestly about his disability. And you know, this would potentially touch on another topic, which is like accessibility, which a lot of people with disabilities struggle with. And I grew up in New York, and I lived most of my early 20s in Manhattan, and it's very hard on your body. I love the city, but it's very hard on your body. And so I wanted to sort of open a door thematically to that sort of concept as well.
Well, you know, I want to go on with what Dennis was talking about at the beginning. See if there are any other questions, and perhaps have our two filmmakers talk with each other about their films and bounce ideas back and forth between you about dating, because I know that dating for me as someone for me, speaking as someone with a disability, was really not possible in high school, and don't want to even think about it in college. So I'd love to hear the two of you discuss this and see if people in our audience have any questions about it.
Yeah.
Hey, William, there is one question that came in for Sean. It's kind of an interesting one. So Ethan, very, very early on, identified himself as an athlete, track scholarship and all that. And the question is, did that influence your decision to hide your physical disability in your conversation?
That's a really great question. And yes, that did influence it, because I wanted to sort of show a juxtaposition of like what kind of guy Ethan, in a way, symbolizes what Sean would have always liked to be. And that's someone that's very well-rounded, very confident, and someone who also is able to move their body freely and without limitations and without anxiety and physical stressors. So I think, yes, because I wanted to sort of show a contrast in the different characters and in the different characters' abilities. So absolutely that did influence it.
This question is addressed to both of you, and it's to you as filmmakers. And the question is, are there other filmmakers that inspire your work? And let's start with you, Ashley.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many. I realized I didn't describe myself at the beginning. So I'm a white woman with long blonde hair, and I'm in front of a brick wall, and I'm wearing a gray shirt. Yeah, you know, I mean, growing up, I really loved Darren Aronofsky. Was really a filmmaker that I really admire, and a lot of my first short really kind of emulated some of his shots and the way he cuts, and that's someone that I really love. Almost every film he's done, I'm a huge fan of. There's also Kelly Freeman Craig, or it's Kelly Craig Freeman. I always mix up the last part of her name, but she's a female filmmaker, and she did Edge of 17, and she has some other projects coming up, but she's just a very smart writer. And I think when I watch that film, I really want my work to really reflect, you know, her snappy dialogue and interesting characters. And, you know, there's always so many ways to say things. And I think she's someone that I really admire her writing.
Yeah, I would say one of my main objectives in putting LIMP together was as a writer, showcase like the way I put together dialogue. And my inspirations, I grew up on all the New York sitcoms, and I wanted this to have a real New York voice. So some of the inspiration comes from like Darren Star, who did Sex and the City, and the Broad City, Abby Jacobson and Alana Glazer. Those are two of the inspirations behind it, and maybe like a drop of Curb Your Enthusiasm. But yes, I'm so, anything I write, I just feel like an urge to infuse New York into it. So that's largely my inspiration, I would say.
We have another question that came in. This question for you, Sean. It's, do you identify more as a gay person or as a person with a disability?
That's such a good question. That is such a good question. I was diagnosed roughly around 2, and it was 1990, and people didn't know what the prognosis would look like. And it was kind of shocking because cerebral palsy is a spectrum condition. So you hear it and you can go to you can, as a parent, you can think sort of the worst and you can feel very scared. But my parents had already seen me develop very nicely. I could speak very early. I was able to articulate. I was able to move around in some ways, but I was not able to walk. And they took me around to all the doctors to figure out what was going on. So my earliest memories are of being a person with a disability. Like my earliest memory is my surgeries when I was 3. And it's kind of a bittersweet one because I was put into a hospital bed filled with stuffed animals from the Disney store. So it's not all tears. And I remember very vividly the years of physical therapy, and there was a lot of bullying, and there was just a lot of figuring out, of grappling with the feeling that it was very unfair. And so there's a very, very strong identity as a person with a disability. And I also, within that, I very much relate to older people, just with like the chronic pain and the challenges of getting around and having to sometimes explain what you can and can't do. That's a big thing that's come from me. Sort of explaining, like, I've gone on hikes. I've gone on amazing hikes in different parts of the world. Like one is actually, I have this amazing story about a hike I went to in Argentina, and they saw my walk and they said, I can't go, they won't take me. And I really lost it. I was so upset because I knew I could do it. I knew I wouldn't be able to go as fast as everyone, but I knew I'd be able to. And then by the end of it, the instructor came up to me and was like, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you'd be able to do this, and you did such an incredible job. Then just to circle back to the question, do I identify more as a person with a disability or a person that's gay? I would say it is equal, because my journey in realizing and then ultimately embracing the fact that I'm gay was equally significant, and in some ways much more challenging, because it wasn't always accepted in my family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It looks like we had exhausted our questions on the chat, so we can just kind of move into an open. Oh, okay. There is a question that came in for you, Ashley, and so it was the casting. So you had to cast a man to be on the other half of the date with a disability. Was this, how'd you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I actually knew Jordan Wisely, who plays Jake. I followed him on Instagram for about a year before, and I knew he's on MTV, a reality TV show on MTV. And I just kind of used him in my mind as the character when I was writing. And then I was like, there's probably no way he can act too, because he's like a model, a reality TV star. And sometimes you're like, I'm really hoping big that he can actually act. And we did an audition with him, and he was incredible and so natural. And we we're just like, oh, wow, okay, this is our guy. And then he actually helped us do chemistry reads with all the women that we were casting. And it was really cool. I mean, I probably auditioned, including self-tapes, like 40 to 50 women who all have like different limb differences or different disabilities too. Cause I wasn't like, I didn't have to be one arm, but I really wanted it to be a disability that could be hidden at certain times. I liked playing with that, like with the camera and the way we shot it. But you know, we found Delaney. I worked with a casting director who was my roommate at one point, and she really knows the mission of you have to really dig deep and discover these people almost, because you know, there's not a ton of really famous actors who have disabilities. And so we ended up finding her, and she did a test read with Jordan, and it was really great. I mean, their chemistry, like their natural discussions between each other. There were so many times when we were filming, they would just be chatting, and I'd be like, oh, shoot that, like shoot what they're talking about. Let's say that again, you know, and shoot it, because they just had such good, you know, banter back and forth. So the casting process was scary, but also really exciting, because when you do find that person, you're like, oh, this is so great, you know. And I'm always like looking for more actors and people, you know, to explore, because even you know, with able-bodied actors, sometimes it's hard to find that person you have in your head. You know, you go through tapes and tapes and tapes, and then when you're dealing with an even smaller population of people who are actors, it's really hard. So I'm like, everyone who has a disability should try and act, because sometimes I think it's like an inherent ability. You know, I sometimes think acting is something that you have, you know, like that you can tap out of yourself and become another character. So, you know, Sean, we should talk more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I would say too, as doing advocacy work on behalf of people with disabilities in our state capital, I do act a fair amount of time. But so I want to ask both of you, do you all have something in the works or something you're looking to do next?
Yeah, you can go ahead
Ashley,
first,
you want to
Sean,
start?
and then, or
Oh,
sure,
Sean, go ahead, Sean.
go ahead, Sean. I just talked.
Sure. So I'm very interested in sort of building out my writing portfolio and diving more into the improv world. I have a lot of projects that touch on disability, like this one. I've written many scripts about it. And then I have a lot that are more sort of, they touch on dating, but in a lot of different realms. Like one is kind of like a magical realism. Another one is sort of about, you know, different religions dating. And so I am just kind of looking to network further and see when things go back to normal and start pitching projects again.
Yeah, it's been really crazy, because I got into South by in March, and it was kind of this place in my career where I finished with this AFI directing workshop for women, which is kind of a year process that we workshop our scripts. We're with 8 other women, and we really just like, you know, develop the project and then shoot it and go through a whole post thing. And I ended up getting signed by an agency, UTA, in March, and I've been going on so many meetings. And like, really, I mean, I'm actually in Canada right now. I'm usually based in LA, but my fiance is Canadian, so I've been doing a ton of Zoom meetings. And since everyone's working virtually, it's been really great, and I've been able to develop. And I have 4 projects that are all moving forward, that are in different spaces, you know, and one's, I can't really share details yet, but one's like a TV show. One is a a big studio is doing like an emerging filmmaker program, and I got into that. I'm also writing right now on a Netflix animated show for kids, and they want to include a character that has a disability. So I've been really pushing that narrative forward. I mean, it's been really amazing how much people are wanting to include disability in their studios and their content. Like all these meetings I've been having, everyone's like, bring me something, you know, like bring me a script, bring me, you know, and things are moving forward. But, you know, in the times of COVID, I can't shoot anything really right now. You know, we're prepping for certain things and we just don't know. It's really hard to plan. And with other, you know, and when you're also dealing with actors with disabilities, some people are in Australia that I want to shoot with, you know, and flights are grounded, or it just gets really complicated with COVID. But it's exciting, you know, and I tell people, like, I feel like the world, at least in Hollywood, like they're waking up to that. We've been completely erased from the narrative. You know, I mean, there are shows out there right now and like things have been going, but not as much as, you know, it's always kind of left out of the diversity conversation. So that's been really exciting and really cool. And just, you know, the kids show thing is probably one thing that I'm so excited about, because it's thinking about a kid watching this and how powerful that is. And that's where it has to start, is really young, you know, like that's where your brain is being formed about different types of people in the world. And it's just been really cool to, like, I sent them a deck of like myself and my disability, and then like all these amazing people that I know with different disabilities, being like, let's have one of these characters, have one of these things. And I had like a hand in really like drawing up the character and the nuance, because you have these discussions with these, I mean, they're all amazing writers, but they need that nuance from someone who's lived with a disability, because they get things wrong. You know, they think it's this way and you're like, actually, it's not really that. I mean, and all of our experience is different, but just kind of like to simple things where you would think, you know, someone would know something, but it's really cool that they're like taking that step to really include people behind, you know, the scenes, like writers and directors and all that stuff. So yeah.
It's such, both of you gave really insightful answers. And as I mentioned, our organization, the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities, we're first and foremost an advocacy organization. And, you know, William, 17 years ago said, hey, why don't we try this film festival idea, Disability Film Festival, because nobody ever gets, you know, get one day in your education on how to interact with people with disability. You don't, not in school, not in college, anywhere. And what we found is the film festival is actually advocacy. It is advocacy. And what in the films you've made, that is advocacy. Now, I know that I'm supposed to leave this for open discussions and conversations. So my last task, this is a event at no charge for anybody who participates or watches it or will watch in the future. Apparently we now have several hundred people watching our online site. And the reason we do that and can prepare for it and give William the time to review these hundreds of films he does in the competition is we have sponsors. So bear with me. And our sponsor levels kind of sound like the roles in a film. At our extra level, the Austin Theater Alliance, the DentaQuest Partnership, Shield Healthcare, MCNA Dental. Our supporting cast sponsors, the next level up, AstraZeneca, Amgen, Mike Shea and Tony Wilcox, Linda Frost, and then our leading cast, the next level of increased funding, American Construction Investigations, Upstream Technology, who is with us today, Pharma, Crystal Lyons, the Harry S. and Isabel C. Cameron Foundation, and CDS in Texas. The next level up is a director level. Notice they're getting more responsible as their sponsorship grows. AbbVie and Humana. And our top level sponsors at producer level, Superior Health Plan, United Healthcare, Amerigroup, and Hart InterCivic. And frankly, without all these folks, we wouldn't be able to do our Cinema Touching Disability Film Festival. It's incredibly valuable, and it does add so much to our advocacy work and public awareness. So with that, I think Laura is going to, are you unmuting everybody? And and inviting a free-flowing discussion, right?
Yeah,
Take it away,
so
Laura.
thanks, Dennis. So often when you go to a film event in person, there is the event ends and then everybody's just chilling in the lobby, talking about the films, maybe talking to the filmmakers, the guests that were there. And so we thought, we would try to approximate that on Zoom. So we're going to officially end the event. If you gotta go, you gotta go, of course. But we will keep the room open for a little while just to keep the conversation going. I know we have an aspiring filmmaker, Alejandrina, who might be interested in the advice from, Sean and Ashley on getting into filmmaking as a person with a disability. So yeah, I'll just kind of start the informal open lobby portion of the event, inviting Alejandrina to unmute.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Alejandrina Guzman. I'm disabled. I have a physical disability. And it was so cool to watch y'all's film and really dig into the dating scene, which at least for me, I'm still navigating and like just embracing that. But like Laura said, I'm really interested in filmmaking and wanted to hear if y'all have any advice on how y'all started in terms of being disabled, like just embracing that, and then kind of a two-part question for y'all's experience outside of filmmaking, and since these two films focused on dating, like how y'all embraced that as well and navigated all of that. And thank you so much for all the work that y'all keep doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll start. So, I think for a long time, I was really scared to go into film. I majored in journalism because I was like, I wanted to write, and at the time I wanted to write for 17 magazine, which doesn't really, exist. It was back in the day. But I took a couple of film classes and I really just started falling in love with it. But I used to think, everyone in Hollywood is glamorous and I wouldn't fit in. Like, I have a disability, it's very visible, and I'm like, I could never, fit in there. And then I had a class and there was a guy who came in who one of his arms was paralyzed, and he was a speaker and he was a distributor. And I was like, oh, so people in Hollywood can have disabilities. And that was kind of my first, time I ever saw myself in a way, represented. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm going to try this. And I just started PAing on sets. I really did the assistant route. So I was an assistant for almost, 6 or 7 years for different executives and producers, and then a director. But the big thing is just start developing those stories right now, depending on what, area you want to go to, whether it's writing or directing. I always have a notebook full of ideas and they've come back. Like some of my first short films, I actually thought of the idea 8 years ago, and it's just scribbled in a notebook, and then you actually, once you learn more about storytelling and how you have to have a beginning, middle, end, all the key elements, and you start reading screenwriting books. Save the Cat. Some people actually talk bad about it, but I'm a huge Save the Cat fan because I think it's it's good to know the rules of a story and screenwriting and then go break them. You can do something unique and different from there, but it's good to know why do stories succeed? Why do people watch movies? Why do we, do this type of stuff? So it's always good to get the basis, depending on what direction you want to go. But I think even if you're, any direction, it's good to know these things about stories. And there's a screenwriter's Bible that's been really helpful for me too. And I didn't go to film school, so I went to journalism school, and I did minor classes in film, but those were more let's watch old movies and analyze it. It had nothing to do with actual filmmaking. So it was a lot of learning from people, working for people, You know what I mean? It took me a really long time. Like I'm 33 now, and finally getting, you know, stuff is actually happening for me, like tangible, real things where I'm the one who has the job and not an assistant level or not someone helping someone else. So it's really, you know, it's like been 10 years of me working my way up, and it's hard, you know, it is a lot of long hours. It's a lot of sacrifice, but you know, it's just going to open up more for people with disabilities. And now, you know, the crazy thing that we've been really chatting about is how with Zoom, a lot of people, you could technically have a writer's room where someone is tuning in from their home, you know, or someone who isn't able to drive, or there's different, you know, disabilities where you can actually work these people in, you know, and that's really interesting to me. And I've been collaborating with some other disabled people of like, okay, what if we created this thing and it was created all by disabled people, you know, as far as like the writing end of it, and developing, and you know, and had disabled people on screen. And I just think it's really going to change in the next, just like, even like, you know, 2 to 5 years. I think we're going to see a lot of more doors open. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
You know, I think Ashley hit on some incredible points, and her journey is a little bit similar to mine, because I went to school for journalism as well. And I've always come at it more from a writing perspective. That was always my goal. But early on in my career, I wanted to get into talk shows. And then about after 4 years of doing that, I said, this isn't for me. So I jumped around a little bit. If I could tell myself one thing from the start, it would be, no matter what your job is, no matter what your status is, always work on your own ideas. Like if that means just jotting it down, taking some time over the weekend to write out treatments or scripts, always be working on it. That's the biggest thing I can say to anyone who's working on getting into this industry. And the other thing is, it's so much about networking. So you have to be a little bit fearless, even though it's very awkward and it's uncomfortable to reach out to people. You just have to sort of push yourself through that and speak about what you want to do and what you can bring to the production or to the table. And then this film, LIMP, that I did, it was so self-funded. I put myself in major credit card debt that I'm just climbing out of now. But you really do have to like push your own projects, and, you know, putting a film together, and Ashley and I both did. Ashley, yours is like 19 minutes or?
Yeah, it's 15.
15 minutes. Okay, mine's 19. So these films take a long time. But if you want to sort of showcase your work, you can maybe start with a short film that's 5 or 6 pages, and you can really shoot it in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And then just like constantly be pushing your work, constantly be pushing your voice. There's so many routes you can take.
Yeah, and someone gave me really good advice too about, you know, because so many people go to film school and they're like, I want to be a director. And I know that's like the path that I'm going down now, but there's so many different ways to be involved in storytelling, and you may like try a bunch of different things, because storytelling, like even if you're, you know, a sound designer, you're storytelling in a certain, you know, just a different medium, and it all comes together, and you're part of making something bigger in the film space, and or editing, or, you know, there's just so many different jobs within filmmaking, you know, and mediums too, from TV shows to films to web series to, you know, shorts or commercials, or, you know, it's really just a huge spectrum of things. But yeah, I agree with everything that Sean's saying. Like really work on your own ideas and keep developing them. And that's, you know, because now I'm at this place where everyone's going, what do you have? And I'm like, well, I have this bad script I wrote, you know, 3 years ago that now I need to like rewrite them, or, you know, now I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I had all these things to give people, but that's part of the, you know, part of the process. So.
Absolutely.
So Sean and Ashley, something that y'all had talked about a lot on our run through that, like, obviously it's in both of your films, and it has, come up, but just it just needs to be talked about so much, is just conceptions that people have about you just because, you have this or that disability, and just like the wacky things that people like will say or assume. And so I just wanted to like circle back to that if there was more that you wanted to say on that, because I feel like y'all were telling some stories that I was kind of getting half of, and I'm like, this is like terrible but hilarious. So,
Yeah.
and William and Susie as well, because I know that y'all have them too. Everybody.
I think that in terms of dating, in terms of assumptions, I believe there are definitely assumptions made about what I can and can't do. I mean, I've once had someone ask if I was able to have sex, and I almost crawled under a table. I was so embarrassed. I was like, I mean, yes, I don't know if I'm good at it, but I can do it. And so there's been some questions like that on occasion. I guess if we're going to talk openly about intimacy, like there's some things about it that I appreciate. Like I have a lot of tightness in my body. And I think when I'm with someone that understands that and they ask me like, are you okay? Like, is this all right for you? Like, I'm not upset by that. Actually, I like it. And I don't mind if it's a little assumptive because I think it's coming from a good place. And I think what's so interesting about being a person with a disability is you're constantly on a journey to learn your body and learn what you can and can't do. And that's something I've sort of accepted as I've gotten older. And I've really learned to own that because I know what I'm capable of. I know what's in range for me, but I also know what I can't do, and I know what my limits are. And that's taken time. You know what I mean? Because growing up, I grew up in like the 90s and the early 2000s, and my disability was not severe enough to leave me out of mainstream events, but it was complex enough for me to not thrive in any sporting outlet at all. And my parents were just always testing where I'd land. So, I think as I got older, I really learned what I can and can't do. And I find that to be empowering. I really do. And I'm at a point like Ashley and I both mostly live in LA, and we're both, she's in Canada right now, I'm in New York right now. But when I'm in LA, I'm now at a point where if a friend asks me to go on a hike, I can usually go depending on the hike, but I will need to hold their hands and I will need their support through different parts of it. And most of my friends are wildly supportive. I've always been blessed with the most incredible friends, the most incredible, understanding and loving friends who were my support through everything, through dealing with my disability, through any bullying I face, and through the coming out process. I've always had these, and they've mostly been women. So I wanna just like emphasize that because, women have helped me through so much of my life. And I would say at this point, 32 years old, I just feel good about knowing my body better than I ever did. And that's both in terms of physical interactions, any sexual interactions, and just drawing the line where I have to.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm excited for when we can hang out in person, Sean, because I want to go have a drink and hang out in LA. But our experiences are very similar because you know, it's always been really interesting because I feel like I've always towed this line of like, I am disabled to some people and to some people I'm not. Like it's, you live in both worlds, or you see how people treat you when they don't first notice. You know, it's something where like if I'm wearing a certain jacket and I'm sitting, you probably can't really tell. And that complexity sometimes is like confusing as you're growing up. And then you also see the difference, you know, how someone views you when they didn't notice, especially like when I was going to bars and dating. It's like someone would see me and go, oh, I'm interested in her, and like start talking to me, but then they notice I have a disability, and you see how they act differently, you know. And that was really hard for me growing up, you know. And I dated a lot, but you know, in college it was very fueled by parties and kind of that scene, because I was very like, okay, if I can kind of forget that I have a disability, then I can, you know, just go on this date, and maybe the person forgot, even though like it's visible. And I don't know, it's very, I like would like tell myself lies about it. But you know, I ended up having my first like really serious relationship at 25. And then, you know, that was really interesting because it was someone who like fully accepted me, my first love, but we barely ever talked about my disability, which was so fascinating to me. And then it kind of ended in a bad way. And now I'm with my fiance, and we're actually married on paper, so he's my husband. Our wedding got pushed because of COVID. You know, we talk about it all the time, and it's something that like, and I prefer this relationship where like I trust him 100%. We can talk about things, you know, like intimacy, so many things that I worried about growing up, that no one or someone would feel not okay with certain things, or I would feel embarrassed. You know, it's totally gone away because you find someone that you trust, you know. And those people are out there who don't care, you know, they care, but they are more accepting and willing to like, you know, they love you for so many other reasons. And like, one day we're all going to be disabled. They could become disabled tomorrow. You know, it's like they understand the big picture of disability, you know. And if I can't do things, or I have to walk really slow, like he's like a power walker, and I'm like, can we walk slower? And he's like, yeah, no problem, you know. And it's kind of just finding someone who's willing to do that because they love you, you know. And that's a really like beautiful thing. And I think for me growing up for so long, I was like, there's no one out there who's going to accept me and accept this. Cause like, I think I had so much shame about myself that I was like, well, I don't want this. Who else is going to want this? You know? And it's just kind of this like process of really like self-love, and realizing that it's just a body that we're in, and we're more than our bodies, and someone's going to love your body as it is, you know. And that's just been really, really important. So it's rough though. I've had a lot of bad experiences as well. You know, I mean, it's all over. I did a lot of online dating like Sean, and was very heavy in the apps for a while in LA, which is a very complicated place to date anyways. All my friends, you know, able-bodied people who date in LA are like, it's awful. So, you know, I think it's important to you know, just keep putting yourself out there and be vulnerable. You have to, you know, have the negative experiences happen to allow something positive to happen. So kind of how I've always looked at it. A lot of wine, a lot of, you know, talking with your friends, getting it all out. So
you hit on some really, really amazing points that just sort of resonated with me. One is like how you dated in college, and how you sort of had to throw yourself into party zone, and like, I don't know if like maybe you were drinking or whatnot. For me, I started so late. I was such a late bloomer. I didn't really start dating till I was like 22, 23. And I didn't really have my first like kiss with a guy until I was 19. And it was so far and few between when I'd actually meet someone. But, and you know, this is sort of something I'm really working through to this day. Like, I'm more comfortable inviting a guy over to hook up with in my bed, where I don't have to walk around, I don't have to get up from a seat or anything, and just have that sort of connection, than to have these conversations on dates, which is, in a weird way, it's so ironic because I grew up where I was so comfortable talking about my disability and talking about cerebral palsy and my LIMP and what I, you know, what I was comfortable with and what not. And then when it came to dating, it just like almost set me back 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, I feel I was the exact same way. Once you have like a person, once anyone was potentially interested in me or I was interested, I'm like, I need to like grab all my long sleeve, wear like the most covering, you know, things to hide my disability as much as possible. And now it's just, you know, I'm like always just like, it's so funny how you can find someone where now I don't even really think about it. I'm just myself all the time, and I'm not thinking about, is he looking at me and thinking I'm weird, or you know, where before it was such like I couldn't imagine not doing that. So it's really interesting, and I think it just keeps getting better as you get older, at least for me, because people are more mature and you're not dating, you know, people who, I don't know, are just looking for one thing. So
and the thing about relationships, like you kind of hit on it, like your husband is like considerate of you and you can talk about anything emotional or anything practical too. And I think that's really like such a beautiful thing that anyone strives for with any baggage or history that they come with. And, you know, I had one serious relationship, and I just want to share this because I know a lot of people with disabilities might be watching or at some point come see this. You don't want to end up with someone who ever uses that against you. And I had one relationship where he was very, very eager to move forward and get married and lock someone down. I don't even think he really liked me that much, but he was just ready. And he once said to me, like, you better find someone who's gonna be willing to take care of you, because who knows what you'll be like in 20 years. And that's such a horrible thing to say to someone.
yeah.
And I just remember in that moment, I just felt so belittled, and I felt like I deserved so much more. And it's in weird moments where you actually, like Ashley, maybe you and I have spent years like sort of doubting ourselves, but it was in a weird moment like that where someone else put me down, where I said, no, that's wrong, and all the stuff I've ever said to myself is wrong.
Totally. There is a whole kind of group of people who will date someone with a disability to be the hero. And it's, you know, my friend actually did, she got her master's in dating and disability studies, and she did a whole interview with like 30 women about partners they've dated. They all have disabilities, and then they all have been in, you know, able-bodied, interabled relationships. And there is a sentiment from some of the women that like their husband is like the hero who came and like finally accepted them, you know, and like a partnership should be equal, you know, where you bring something, they bring something. And, you know, of course you can look at the person as like, I'm so happy you came into my life and, you know, whatever, but you really, if they're using your disability to feel better about themselves, like that is a red flag. It's really, you know, can be really, I instantly sense that out when I'm, you know, there were a lot of people for a long time, I would date people and feel bad for rejecting them or not wanting to be involved, because I'm like, well, they're so nice, they're cute, you know, all these things, and me thinking like, well, who, you know, who else is gonna want to date me or whatever. But then I had to realize, like, you know, I just because I have a disability doesn't mean I don't have preference, or I don't have, you know, chemistry shouldn't have to be there, which it should, you know, or someone that you also want to be with, not just because they, you know, want to be with you. So
Absolutely.
it's very interesting.
But it takes time, I think, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's really interesting. There's a girl whose book I'm reading. It's called Sitting Pretty. Rebecca, I don't know, she just came out with a book, but she has an Audible too. Yeah, and I was just like reading it, and she talks about like growing up and how, you know, you view your body and having it as like a disabled person when you're young, you're like, no one's gonna want this, you know. It just that her sentiments were very similar to mine growing up. And you're, you know, my big thing is like, why do we have these ideas like embedded in our brain? And then it comes back to like representation and humanizing people with disabilities. That is not, I grew up seeing no one with a disability on screen, you know, no movie that I loved, or no, no thing had, you know, someone with a disability. So that's what I'm like, I really want to do stories about these things that I wish I saw, you know, when I was growing up or a teenager, and I was like, oh my gosh, how is that person navigating having a disability and having a partner, you know? And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to a point you made earlier about the kids show, like that is, it's so true, because giving kids that visualization, that is where it starts. And let's, you know, some of the worst years, the worst bullying years was when I was a kid. I mean, it was horrible in elementary school. I had people imitating the way I walked, and, you know, I wonder if one of the Power Rangers went around with a limp, would I have been singled out like that?
Right.
And I think there's this amazing thing about mainstreaming. I think it's so important to have shows that are designated to this, movies that are designated to this, and also to have people with disabilities in ensemble casts, because that shows there's an office and someone has a disability.
Right.
You know what I mean? It shows just how integrated people with disabilities are and can be.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think, you know, I think we're going to start seeing it, hopefully. I'm like, that's what I'm ranting about in every meeting, you know, and that's why we got to push ourselves forward and be like, no, this is really important, you know. And even with, you know, this kids show, there sometimes can be pushback of like, oh, but if we're really having to like design something so specific, it can be expensive. But then you have like the showrunner who really believes in it, and they're like, no, we have to do that. You know, you get people, because I had a separate email conversation with the showrunner being like, I'm telling you, this is so important. You have no idea how this is going to affect people, writing like ranting emails, sending him documentaries. And then he's like, we have to do this, you know? And that's what you need, is people who have a stake in it to be like, we have to, you know, and not back down.
Exactly.
That's like legislative advocacy.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
It is.
And I just want to make a point about legislative advocacy and all these things, because I look at the advancement and the normalization of the gay community in the past 10 years, and I look back to the legalization of gay marriage, not as a state-by-state thing, but as a national legislation. And I say, you have to create legislation that screams equality, that doesn't leave interpretation. So I believe that when you show, when it comes from the top, when it comes from legislation and the law says, you know, we really are pushing to make things equal and fair. Like when people with disabilities, like accessibility, that is something that's so essential at this point, because why should people be robbed of opportunity? Because they function differently. So I believe that like equality is something that comes from so many levels. And I look back honestly, like at just how many LGBT storylines are now in the mix. And it's because we've had such a push and the attitudes have changed. So I do think it's heavy lifting, but like, you know, Ashley pushing back to her executive producer and saying, this is why it has to happen. It's things like that that will start to make the differences and move things forward.
Yeah.
A couple of things come to mind. I mean, I've been in a relationship with my wife now since '92. So I don't remember a lot about dating beforehand, but it's interesting to see how people react when we go out to a restaurant or we go out shopping. If I've got my Ken with me, it's typical that the waiter or waitress will ask her, well, what does he want? They won't even address me. And, you know, that was true even 2019, 2020 when we were going out. So there's something about the attitudes that people have that need to be addressed. And the other thing that comes to mind, this really follows up on that, is when I was at the 2018 Boston Marathon, we all had a dinner the night before at a place that was like outside of public transportation, really. So we had Ubers come to take the runners back to the hotels. And they had two able-bodied people with every blind runner to make sure that the Uber would stop and would not leave them. Now, this was 2018. Why should you need to have people making sure that a cab is not going to leave someone who has a disability? There's something about the attitude that people have, the sort of exclusionary attitude, or the attitude, oh, these people are lesser, or we don't need to take them, or we have to rely on speaking to someone else to figure out what he or she would want for dinner that
Right.
needs to be addressed. And have either of you experienced anything like that?
I'm trying to think. There's a paralleled experience for me. I'm not a huge drinker. I started late, and so now I can get kind of drunk off of one drink. But when I go out to bars, the bartender, the bouncers will often think I'm too drunk to enter, and I'm stone cold sober, and it's like, it's a little bit offensive because they'll see me, I'm a little bit wobbly, and on a good day, I can be fine. I can like sort of walk a little bit gracefully, but if I'm tired or if I had a drink in me, like I'm pretty wobbly, and they assume I'm like smashed. And so I've gotten pushback when I'm like out with friends about not letting me in. And then I have my friends, of course, they come to rally for me, but it's embarrassing. I'm not gonna lie, like it's awkward. I'd rather never deal with that, but it does happen. And that's sort of the condescending tone that I've come across in the past. And this is just sort of a funny one-off, but I'm not a great driver, and I also need my glasses. And I was driving a bunch of friends home from a wedding once, and I got pulled over, and he looked at me, and I was, again, completely sober, but he was like asking me a bunch of questions, and then he sees me walk and he goes like, uh-oh, what's this? And I'm like, I have cerebral palsy, I swear, I'm not drunk. And he made me walk in the straight line, and I was like, I gotta be honest with you, like, I don't know if I could even do this on my best day. So I ended up taking the sobriety test, and not a drop was in me. So look at that.
Yeah, I mean, I get, it's funny because I get like people compensating, like they feel like they need to overly compliment me. They need to be very, very friendly, give me free things. Like, it's not the worst thing, but it's also, it feels very condescending when it's happening, and they think they're being really nice. And I'm like, I do not like the vibe of this, because I can tell that you think I need this compliment to feel good about myself, you know. And it's funny, writing, you know, Single, I became even more aware of it. I think I ignored so much of it, like, oh, thanks, you know, or what, I just kind of like go throughout my day. But really writing Single and realizing how often it happens is like shocking. You know, you're just like, oh, there's another person who did this thing, or, you know, I'm wearing some like scrubby outfit and someone's like sees me walk to the bathroom at a restaurant. You know, I see their look, it's an up and down look, you know, figuring out what's wrong with me in their mind. And then as I walk back, she's just sitting at her table, and she like stops me, and she's like, I just want to let you know that I love your outfit. And I'm like, it just is so bizarre, where you're kind of like, this does not feel like a compliment. It sounds, you know, like I need to give this thing to her, this gift of like her feeling good about herself. And I really don't like that. And then, I mean, that's the whole like pretty face thing is, I don't know. It's just, it's something that happens a lot. And I get people are just maybe have good intentions, but they just need, and that's why I made the film, is because people are like, oh, I didn't really realize saying that thing is a backhanded compliment. You know, I really want people to analyze and look at what they're, you know, how they're treating someone, if there is kind of this condescending attitude towards it.
And I think it was captured so well in Single. First of all, the actress is a very beautiful girl, of course, but you capture this sort of inner dialogue and pressure that the people around her feel, that they're walking in an elevator and they're like, shit, what do I do?
Yeah.
And it was just so well done. And it's just so true. It's like guilt comes out in them, pressure comes out, and just this combustion to say something where, as you said earlier, if you're next to a beautiful girl in an elevator, you're most likely not going to say anything.
Yeah. Yeah. You usually probably wouldn't, you know, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming up on 6 o'clock, and we've had y'all for 2 hours, which is so like great. Like, I'm not usually this excited about being on Zoom for 2 hours straight, but this has been really fun.
I've got a closing comment that I think Ashley would really like.
Yeah.
And God, this goes back to 2012. I was in the 2012 San Francisco Marathon, along one part, and a fellow runner comes up to me and she says, "Oh, am I seeing things, or is that a buffalo off there in the distance?" And I said, "Well, I can't tell. I'm legally blind. I can't see." "No, you're not." "Yes, I am." Then she stopped for about 30 seconds and said, "Oh, well, you're doing all right then."
Oh my God.
Oh, would I be doing horrible if I had 20/20 vision?
Yeah.
Thanks a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, the whole inspiration, you know, I mean, I grew up always, you know, I grew up with these sisters. I have a brother as well. Everyone's always like, "Oh, you have a brother." I talk about my sisters a lot, but they're very, you know, beautiful, modelly looking sisters and beautiful bodies, and just like me always feeling, you know, I was having this conversation with my sister about when people are like telling me I'm so inspiring all the time, I'm like, am I inspired? Like, what am I doing that's inspiring you? And is it because they're like, you have such like a good attitude? And I'm like, why? Because if I had my body, you would have a bad attitude. It's just like very confusing when someone calls you inspiring. And I'm like, but what about the person that everyone's like inspired by? Like, do they just have it bad? You know, I don't know. It's just like really was something growing up that I would really struggle with. And now I'm like, you can call me inspiring if you're inspired by me pushing through the industry and making films, you know, or like give it a tangible thing instead of just existing, you know, and you can say admire instead, maybe, if, you know, you just want to say something else. But
It's such a good point, though. Such a good point.
no, this is really fun.
Cinema Touching Disability thanks our Ctdff online sponsors: Amerigroup, Heart Intrasivic, Superior Health Plan, and United Healthcare.